In a world of fractured stories, timelines buried, and truths erased, one project dares to ask the question, what if everything you thought you knew about history was wrong? This is GTR, Genesis, Timeline and Roots. A 5,025-year simulated walkthrough tracing a melanated Adam back to 4000 BC. Over the last decade, new revelations confirm a black origin for humanity, from European vaults to tribal memory, Babylon to Britain. This is not just history, this is a challenge, a simulation, a movement. Meet the man behind GTR, Dr. Wilton MacDonald II, Caymanian, British, Jamaican, haplogroup E and stateless for 26 years. Now a global explorer, 119 countries and counting. A hedge fund lawyer, a UK chartered accountant, a seeker of the lost archives of our people. But the question remains, if all black people came out of Africa, does that make us only African? Or are we also European, Scottish, Native American, Jacobite Hebrew, Asian? GTR exists to answer that question. You've felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. A splinter in your mind. That splinter has brought you here, to GTR. Whites can't trace their roots before the 1800s. Where's ours? Where are the tribes? The languages, the kings, the queens, the true Hebrews? Where did the giants go? Where are the Neanderthals? Angels, aliens? Why do we speak in so many tongues? Was Babel just a myth? A memory? History has holes. Hollywood has lied. The system was never made for us to remember. Only 5 to 8% of people today are white. And what about the 1800 stories and postcards of the cabbage babies? But nearly all history books center their story. That doesn't add up. Atlantis, lost cities, vanished civilizations, or were they erased? Try GTR. Take the red pill and awaken to the truth of your ancestors. Or take the blue pill and keep dreaming a fantasy. GTR. A simulated walkthrough of Black Hebrew history and eschatology. This is the beginning of remembering.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining. This is Genesis Timeline Roots, GTR. We are episode 22 weeks, and thank you for the support to Cayman and the wider Caribbean for just helping us and giving us the support that we need in order to grow. We are a highly rated program, and again on YouTube and Facebook, the numbers are growing. So we're thankful to your glowing support for GTR, Genesis Timeline Roots. I have here two distinguished gentlemen. I will let them introduce themselves fully. Reverend Joshua Maponga, and we have Professor Samuel Njau. Njau? Hope I didn't butcher the name.
Njau. Yes,
Njau.
Yes.
And I'm your host, Prince Chief Dr. Wilton MacDonald, barrister, a lawyer, CEO for ADDI, filming location Burkina Faso. So yeah, gentlemen, roll away. Please introduce yourselves to GTR and the Cayman audience.
I'm Maponga. I'm coming to you from Summers of Thought. I also support the ADDI Cultural Corner, and I write a bit here and there. And my background is already in logistics from the religious, and I've now drifted much more into African spirituality and Pan-African conversations around the re-establishment of African pride, retracing our steps, and trying to build the one Africa that we want. This is seen me traveling around the continent and meeting up with government and cultural leaders to start up the conversation. The blueprint was left by Nkrumah and Nyerere, but we feel now the how to do what was proposed must be done. That's what we're trying out to put some wheels. But most inclusively to that, I have a new career that I've given myself now as a social re-engineer, which is to do with rewiring the African mind, particularly building a bridge between indigenous knowledge systems and the religious philosophy of the African, which has been left in oral tradition. And we're trying to see if that can actually formulate part of the academic body of work so that the students of the future don't have only to reference the colonial literature, but they can also be able to dig into their own roots. And then I think as the diaspora is coming, we needed to be as authentic as possible to the backgrounds in which the older mother with the African history lines and timelines are situated in. So our crafts, our arts, our music, our drums, and all the things that formulate what we might call our epistemic theories of existence are really of a great fascination to me, I think.
Thank you, Professor. The great, wonderful. Thank you, Reverend. So, Professor Samuel, go ahead. I welcome the intro, and please introduce yourself to the Cayman audience.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome. My name is Samuel Irungu Njau, and I'm the chairman and founder of Summit International Institute that is situated in Burundi. That is a chartered university by the Burundian government to offer architecture, monitoring and evaluation, computer science, entrepreneurship, and tourism and hospitality. We are also a member of Inter-University Council of East African. And I'm so happy to be part of this great mission for us to talk about ourselves, the root. We need to go back to our root. And I'm so happy for Reverend Maponga for organizing this meeting with our Professor Prince. It's really wonderful. I've been thinking about this, and I was lucky. I did history as my major. So at least I have a lot of history, and English was my minor. So at least I'm able to understand about Africa. So in short, there is a very good curriculum we have developed with Professor Rumumba and Professor Maponga. It has 7 areas. The first one is political decolonization. The second one is physical and territorial decolonization. The third one is mental and psychological decolonization. The fourth one is social and cultural decolonization. The fifth one is food sovereignty decolonization. The sixth one is medical and pharmaceutical decolonization. And the last one is technological decolonization.
It is just to evoke the kind of discourse that based on the literature, based on the research, based on everything that I have seen and I've been working on a GTR. So for the audience, I mean, again, it's a recap of GTR and what it means. For me, a year ago now, it was conceived the notion that based on the 5 years of post-doctorate work and looking at an area that I really wanted to explore, just my namesake and what it means to be a Black man, to be a MacDonald, to be someone from the Caribbean searching and just not knowing the roots. It's a deep, existential, lifelong search that started from, I would say, the first years that I could recall as a child in the 1970s. And I have always asked my father, asked my parents for their ancestry. A lot of people in the Caribbean, they yearn. And this is, again, something for our Pan-Africanists, for Professor Samuel and Reverend Joshua to even weigh on, that from a 6-region perspective, we just keep yearning and searching for our roots. And funny enough that we spoke about those roots, the roots of Africa. And just in 5 years, I managed to reconnect with some of those roots, and that's where it sort of has led me to this place, the GTR, Genesis Timeline Roots. So in light of the book, the Genesis, the book, the Bible, so biblical book of Genesis, and the chronology, the timeline, adhering to some of those biblical constructs and the timeline, 4000 BC, whether that was a recreated world or a created world. Maybe perhaps, and I'm leaning towards it being a recreated world, but our present dispensation, our present model of our planet appears to be roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years. I say 5,000 to 6,000 years because for James Ussher and some of the scholars, they adhere to a 6,000 year path, 2,000 years from Christ and 4,000 years before Christ. Given the research that I've done, it suggests that the Middle Ages were never dark. They just never existed. We moved quickly from the time of Christ and we built empires. We developed cities, and some refer to as Tartaria. The knowledge was not lost. And then we reached a point where there was a global reset, and in the late 1700s, or I say 700s. So this background that I have, it's one of the paintings that I've discovered and found in Germany. It's one that it's so close to me in my heart because it's representing Europe. It's freezing Europe in time. It's been verified. The names of the writers are in the German language. I don't speak German, but you could use your camera and you can use your camera and translate. That's available today. Those are cameras, professors back. Those are writers which are from Germany, from Poland. Oh, the good professors back from Germany, from Poland, from Sweden. And these are writers that are European. And I say it's 706, not really 1706, but it's roughly 300 years ago. We have this history. And so, Professor, sorry, you left and jumped out for the call. I just wanted you to rejoin your intro. I was just referring to the background and this painting in Germany, which is not on public display. It's not. It's one of Europe frozen in time, not by visiting Moors, as they say, but by real sons of Africa who lived, developed, and built up Europe where we see it today. These guys, gentlemen, were Europeans, Black Europeans, just 300 years ago. So over to Professor Samuel.
Thank you.
Okay, good, wonderful. And so I just wanted to know, and I've shared my thoughts about the changing history of Europe, because we always refer to as colonizers. I was referring to my search. My search is a deep one in trying to map out this GTR timeline of roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years. One is a deep existential, deep dive and search for my roots, for my history. And you mentioned the roots. You mentioned even on the intros, the roots, the African roots. What do you think? I want to get your thoughts on this painting and what this means to you before you saw it, because I have been mentioning it, showing it often, a lot of times, as I met Reverend Maponga a few times now, as I've interacted with you, Professor. What are your thoughts about this, and how does that change your views about Europe? Because that's the center point of my research on the melanated state of Europe, just 300 years ago, not thousands, but literally 300 years ago. What is your takeaway? How does this impact you? When you first saw this, I know it probably took a while to sink in. Anyone, I just wanted to jump in. What are your thoughts about this painting and what it represents?
What is very fascinating is that in our generation, if I could use the biblical text that says, knowledge shall increase. And with the availability of more modern ways of education like media and cloud-based storages of data, Google, we are beginning to see a new narrative penning itself out from the dustbin of the white man or the Caucasian lies. Initially, the narrative that they are the ones who brought civilization to the world, which has now been proved not to be true. Looking at the history of the African across the entire globe, it goes without saying from Spain to Europe, even the naming of Europa itself, which is actually an African woman, Scotland, which is also an African woman, and Russia pulled in another quick one a few months ago when the pictures of black theological messiahs are being drawn from the pictures. I was in Jerusalem also, and there's a corridor there where they say Jesus was died and etc. And there's a small little corridor there. One of the Hebrew guides who was with me took me to that room, and right in there there's a picture of a black messiah. That is right now the nostrils of the whitened messiah on the front, but at the back you find that history line is there. We can go into North and South America. We can get into Peru. We cannot argue the black Africans who are in India, who are in Europe, who are in America. The movements of Mansa Musa at the turn of the centuries and way back, where ships were actually moving into the Americas, and the footprint of the African is there. But when it comes to Carthage and Greece and Africa and Axiom and Egypt, we have been dating this history, the entire history from my theological training, the entire biblical narrative cannot even start to breathe, to speak, without it being associated with the very environment in which the text is extracted. Namely, this will be Ethiopia, this will be Egypt itself, this will be Sudan, and most importantly, this will be the River Nile and the Euphrates, which becomes the very bedrock on which this entire biblical narrative is sitting. And the archaeological verifications of those areas in terms of the cradle of humankind, etymologically speaking, words like Tanganyika, for example, they actually mean where the world began. Tanga is begin in Shona, Nika is the world. So we begin to look at the most ancient tribes like the Hadzaras, who are still in existence today in those areas, the Khoisan in the south, the Aborigines in the north, and of course, the Moors in the upper north. And the researchers are coming together, and I think in our generation, we will be able to start putting together some form of literature from our oral traditions of the Damans, the Malis, whose time frames and the Shango bonds might throw us way away from our academic and scientific calendars. Because whoever owns your time will most likely own your Genesis. Because if we lock your time to be 200 years old, then we try to squeeze everything within the 200 years old. But if we can agree that even at the arrival of the Jews in Egypt, Egypt is a civilization that is doing well. So Africans do not begin their history at the arrival of the Jews, but as it were, the Jews come to plunge into a history that is surviving. Genesis does not spare us also, because when Cain decides to do his murderous crimes and he wants to go north, he says, but if I go there, they will kill me. Just that word, they will kill me, begins to throw in a whole new paradigm of explanation as to who else was out there, where he found his wife and his uncle ended up marrying the two wives and etc. And now the invasions of the sons of God and etc. So for me, actually, the theological, more or less the St. Augustinian theological framework of locking the Bible in the 6,000-year history of Adam and Eve, it's not a scientific formula. It's a theology. Well, scientifically speaking, we need to account that. Are we saying that all the dinosaurs have disappeared in the last 6,000 years? That can't be. There could be another creation prior to the flood. So that by the time you are hearing that there was water and there was darkness, so there was another civilization that was there prior to the creation of Genesis, which we as theologians need to sharpen up our pencils and begin to do a much more vigorous interrogation. And such pictures are the ones that you are beginning to find. Their authenticity is actually beginning to show you the cultural presence of a certain people of a different color. Maybe the real multi-million-dollar question is what happened? What happened to the black people now that we have these places seemingly all infested, all occupied with the lighter skin race? And what happened to this history, which is only now hanging in the basement of the aristocrats and the bureaucrats and the oligarchs? That's why you find such paintings. They are not on the public eyes, but the history cannot be hidden.
This history we mentioned about hanging in the basements. This is so real. When Putin came out and said, this is now black icons, Russian icons, and Jesus and the Last Supper and David and Moses and these biblical figures painted throughout time. 50,000. Russia declared that they would build a museum. I don't know if they have finished it, but when Putin called it, 50,000 images, black art images, flooded into Russia. Now, who had them? And even the same painting, which is not hanging publicly, some people would say, oh, these writers were white men, but they had blackface on, which is crazy. Because if you examine the legs, if you examine some of the arms on them, you would see black skin, dark skin, same thing matching. So people are not going to paint their whole body one color black just to take a photo. That doesn't make sense. Blackface is a stupid tradition. I don't know who started it, somewhere in Hollywood. But these men, you can see the legs and the arms that they were black men. And the point that I also want to raise, I'm leaning towards, in a sense of history, that based on a literal reading of Genesis 1, that there ought to be something that was there. Spirit of the Lord cast this shadow across the deep and the waters, and they mentioned water, and you're thinking, well, those things were mentioned in the very first opening of Genesis. So what was there? So it's a recreation which would account for all that sedimentary history, all that history that they said about, millions and millions of years. I cannot touch that section of creation. All I could do is deal with the current. And what is damning for the doubters, the naysayers, would be the population stats. At the time of Christ, so roughly 1,000 years ago to 2,000 years ago, we had 150 to 200 million people. And that signed off by the United Nations. When this painting was done 300 years ago, whether it be 1706 or 706, the population was roughly 700 million. And now, today, we're well beyond 8.2 billion. Some things had to happen to result and cause this. For me, having 150 million people during the time of Christ, that would suggest to me that we couldn't have a civilization that was so like in our dispensation, the current version of Earth 2.0 or Earth 3.0, whichever version that we're thinking of when Genesis 1, God recreated the world. There could not have been. How many people could there really be if you say the flood happened in roughly BC 2400? And even if some people say, oh, no, the flood didn't happen. But how many persons could literally be created in that 2, 3, 4,000 period before Christ? The numbers has to make sense. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that about where we peg. GTR is establishing a timeline. I am supportive of the Bible. And I know some parts may seem fanciful because not literal interpretation can be done. There's some people who do exegete, parts of the scriptures, and they do hermeneutics and other parts of really advanced theology. But for me, as a lay person, the numbers, look at it. The framework is roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years. We went from pretty much 0 to 150 to 200 million people. Time of Christ, to this painting 300 years ago, 700 million, and this is documented by the United Nations. Then today we're at 8.2 billion. I just wanted to weigh in. I mean, have you reflected on the numbers too, in light of those numbers? What are your thoughts again? Because this is the core of GTR, our timeline. We need to have a timeline. I know they said that Chinese civilization is very old, and they said yes, it's very old. But how do we account for millions of Chinese who were living at the time of Christ? How come their numbers would not be larger today, even beyond the 2 billion? You have to just extrapolate and say, well, what were their numbers? You have an old civilization. I just wanted anyone, and Reverend Josh or Professor Samuels, feel free to weigh in. I'm looking at the numbers because this gives credibility to GTR. Have you ever thought about those demographic data? And it's not my thoughts. It's coming from the United Nations, which anyone can feel free to look up and to verify those demographic data and numbers.
There is the first question that you asked about our ideas about the photos and the painting behind. I concur with Professor Joshua in that if you take it in the two ways, we have the biblical way and historical way. If you look at the historical way, we are told that Homo habilis started in Africa. Let's start from there. That one is very known. Now, how it came out to that from Homo habilis, then they went, then all of a sudden the history turned and there were the black people went missing. It's a mystery. Number two, if you look at the art of writing, it started in Egypt. That's something very important. How it went from Egypt, it went even to Europe, and then the history was somehow it went missing until now. They say that the African people are not influential. There is also something that Professor Maponga said about the issue of Ethiopia, that is Kush, the South Kush, and then part of the part of this Lake Tanganyika and the like. It's very, very clear that some of these issues have been erroneously been blotted so that they can blot this issue of Africa. There's also something here about coming to your issue of the numbers. I'll just take the issue of just a case study of Kenya, a very practical one. When we got our independence, and it's not very long ago, it's around 65 years. Now I want to use a very simple mathematics to prove that these figures sometimes are inflated. We are told that when we got our independence, we were only 5 to 6 million. Now, from that time, there is 65 years. Now, assuming that each person gave birth to 5 children, I'm just using a very little mathematics, and then we see the kind of figures that have been inflated. If you take one person giving birth to 5 children, or even 10, let's say 10 kids, which is not very possible, and then from for 65 years, there are only 3 generations, because we assume that each generation is around 25 years, that is 75. So there are 3 generations, which means the first generation, whereby each of the 10 million gave birth to 10 children, then you multiply by 3, you cannot get 54 million. There is no way, because the population is seen to have multiplied 6 times, which is not possible. So that's why I did some survey using my country, because I'm a Kenyan, and I know the figures from the time we got our independence. So that idea of having 8 billion people in less than 2,000 years, and unless people are giving birth like rats, I don't know whereby I don't know. I need to be corrected. But using this very practical way, there is no way the 5 million people in 60 years can be 54 million. There is no way. Unless there's maybe Maponga will correct me. In the Bible, there is this Israelites, when they went to Egypt, their birth was miraculous birth. Actually, even the Bible says, by the time the midwife used to go to see the baby, the mother who was giving birth, they had already given birth. So it was so rapid that it was a God way of multiplying Israel. And people say that they went to Egypt as a punishment. It wasn't a punishment. It was a breeding ground where God wanted them to be more and more and more, so that they can go to their promised land. Unless that one is the only miracle of the miracle birth that we have. But the other ones, it is very, very impractical, whereby we have 80 million in less than 2,000 years.
Not even 8 million, 8 billion.
From 1800 to 1900, the planet added 1 billion. So in 1900, the planet had 1.7 billion.
Because the narrative of the multiplicity of human beings feeds directly into their reduction of population. It's an agenda item that we want to create a picture that we are overpopulated. I mean, you and I have traveled the width and breadth of Africa. We have flown over Europe. We have flown over Americas. We have flown over China. In all honesty, there's no split of light of those. There is enough space for everybody. This whole thing of we are overpopulated. It's like even this green energy, this gas emissions. We don't come up with all these agenda items. Now COVID was here the other day. And there's some mischief that is happening in the intellectual space to control and manage, international, global, and regional political. So it's even embarrassing for us to sit here as academicians and discover that what we call scholarship is actually commercial propaganda, where we have lost the honesty of academic conversation. Instead, we have become recyclers of some parasite propaganda, which has whitened and diluted, tried as much as possible to delete. I mean, you look at the movies they do, Moses of Egypt, Cleopatra, you look at all these Bajio stories, given every opportunity, they want us to believe that they started fashion. They want us to believe that they started medicine. They want us to believe that they studied architecture. They even take our pyramids and put it on the US dollar and look like Egypt has always been in the States, And so this whole concept, in religion, becomes the machinery that propagates and continuously drum that story of the inferiority of the African, as it were, in the face of quote unquote, European and Western civilization. So, and I think for me, when academic work becomes when academics becomes the political tool, then what you are doing there, you have gone on to brainwashing on steroids, because then the quality of thought patterns that you produce and the quality of people that come out of that, they cannot rise above the education that you have given them.
And I could just say that what you hit on, Professor Samuel, about the numbers seeming so incredulous. I have had some journalists, even on prior shows on this GTR, where journalists have looked at the white ancestors. They can't find any really real ancestors and forefathers of those white colonizers. They cannot find the history. It's clouded in mystery. Oh, they were frontiermen. Oh, they didn't have much history. They came over the border and always slipping to South Africa, even though they may be looking at other places, like even Zimbabwe, looking at Kenya too, and other places in Africa. It just seems to point back to South Africa as a reference. They were searching for me more than 2 months, and they could not find the ancestors, the forefathers, the foreparents of those white colonizers. And I have been doing my research on McDonald's, regardless of ethnicity. There were some Indian McDonald's that came as workers, indentured servants. My mama, she's a Ramlal. Her mother's side is Sibran and Ramlal. They're all Indians. They came from India, Southern India, Madras. They took names of, Anglo size sort of Williams or Johnson, and some even took McDonald. So they did take names. The blacks, they said, pretty much got their names from masters, even though I could not find any trace of any master slavery, enslavement, Africans in my history. But more to point, the person who matches closest to me at DNA, I keep saying, is DaCosta McDonald, a man who's 109, still alive today, 1917, someone who was born in Grenada, living in Trinidad, stopped eating meat for 40 years, and his grandfather's name was John William, born in 1840 in Scotland. And I have uncovered more than 200 relatives that are black. They have the names, no traces and records of enslavement and slavery. Again, I am proud to be associated, be called African, to be Yoruba and small part Igbo, but Yoruba mostly. I am Nigerian, again, proud of that fact. But I found my ancestors, my close links to Scotland and the Scottish links through Canada, Cape Breton, circled all the way back to the Caribbean. I've traced those roots, and other people living in Cuba, in Dominican Republic, in Jamaica, in Grenada, in Barbados, in Trinidad, in Panama, all over the West, USA, Canada. They have DNA matches and strong matches with me. They also bear the name of McDonald or something close like McDougall or McLeod or McConnell, which, again, they have these Celtic sounding names. So that is my background. So what I wanted to do too, starting again to you, Professor Samuel, and I thank you for the point raised about how it's not likely to create the so many people, even in Kenya, with a 6X, based on the generations. There's a problem with the gap. And I notice in history, been to 130 countries. There's some places that you can't account for. Like for Stonehenge in England, they don't know how it came about and where the people went to. Machu Picchu in Peru, the people left. They created these tiered gardens and they left. In Orkney, Scotland, the top part of Scotland, in the Neolithic sites of Orkney I visited, people just left. You have these blank spots in time, and you have these blank spots in terms of our civilization. Even they said 40 million people are missing from the UK, and they have a destruction of records. The US Census, the 1890, was destroyed by fire. They don't know how it came about, but in the 1920s, poof, it went up in smoke. That's the 1890 census. The Celtic records were housed in Northern Ireland. There was a fire in the 1920s. Coincidence? and the records for 800 years got destroyed of the UK largely, housed in one place. We have all these things that you say, well, you maybe sound like conspiracy, but sometimes the conspiracy theory will lead to conspiracy facts. And those are the facts that are presented today. I wanted to just do a dive on each of your ancestry. Professor Samuel, you go and take the floor as how far back can you go in terms of your mother's ancestry and father's ancestry, and which countries does it cover? Is it only Kenya, or are we talking about other countries as well?
From the our family tree, we are Bantus, and Bantus are people who have their origin in the Congo. So after we trace, I can be able to trace my root up to five generations. But what we are told is that we came from Congo and then all the way to Tanzania. Then we went up to Mount Kenya, because my root is a Kikuyu from Kenya. Now there's something else I forgot to mention that is very crucial. If you look at Africa, we have the highest number of tribes. That is something, because my dissertation when I was studying masters, I did about tribes in Africa. If you look at Congo, we have 680 different tribes. 680 in one country. In my country, we have 42. Those are major tribes, but when you have them dialects, it's 105. If you go to Tanzania, we have 140. If you go to Uganda, there are 85. If you look at all the tribes in Africa, it will shock you. We have thousands and thousands. If you go to Japan, Japan actually there are 130 million. But out of these 180 million, they are only one tribe. That is something that people have never had. If you look at Kenya, the population is 65, which means is less than half of Japan, but we have 105 different dialects and tribes. So that is why sometimes when I hear these funny arguments that people about Africa and our origin, you see the history itself can really tell only that they want us to not to believe and to overshadow us with other funny things. And I think this one is a very important point that many people have never thought about, but it's a very crucial part.
And Reverend, you have the floor. I want you to detail as much of your history and ancestry on both sides.
My fascination has been a combination of tradition, culture, with a very strong etymological flair to the conversation. So when you begin to hear the Anunnaki history, that these people were coming from a place called Nibiru. These Anunnakis came from a planet called Nibiru. And then you come to the deep south in Zimbabwe here, and you hear that we are the Mbires, and our grandmother was Nibiru. And then the Mbires, which are the monkey clans and etc. And you wonder, how do you have the Sumerian Akkadian history of the Mesopotamian region having its etymological connections with the builders of the Great Zimbabwe, which still remains a mystery up to now. And by the way, Zimbabwe has been more than 282 sites in the southern hinterland, with the Great Zimbabwe as the biggest of them all, from as far as Mchena in Mozambique to Namibia, to Domoshawa in Botswana, Maponga in South Africa, and Njau in South Africa itself. You see the expansion of the Great Zimbabwe, that it is not only, and to be associated with that kind of a history, knowing that our forefathers are actually the builders of this Great Zimbabwe. Then the architectural designs are still of fascination, but closer look at some of those constructions will then tell you they are all within the 26 degrees Greenwich Meridian line, from up north coming down Sudan, Eden Valley, and all these are timepieces, as it were, which were either for levitation of stones, dolomite stones being used for that, timetables in Zalelanga being the calendar itself, which is actually a map of the Milk White Way, but designed onto the ground, and how maybe that would be a map of how we came here, should we take the story that we come from the stars. So this history for me then would begin to link up, our totemic expressions. Then we begin to sing the praises as to who you are. You begin to hear those peaks in the recitations of the history that we actually crossed over the Zambezi. We used to be in Tanganyika, and my grandfather then would tell us, your grandfather the father of Maponga and Rara and Chena and Duma, Derere, Chapinduka, Pomojena, and then you get into the Mbire clans and Nagastes of Sudan, which is Nangashe, which is the Ethiopian guy, get back into Yemen. So, and again, what makes it fascinating is that we cannot take the single narrative, like in 1800s and in 1700s, that's the only time when blacks moved from Tanganyika coming down. No, they've been walking up and down this continent forever. I could even succumb to an academic thesis that could actually establish some of these empires in the south as being pre the time of Solomon, because we are from the land of Er, which is in the Bible, which is the land of gold. And if we're doing business with Solomon, you cannot tell me that we're selling that gold from underneath the trees. We were established monarchs, established empires with a fervent history, and we can walk around Africa and our totemic connections to each other. Then you can begin to see as far deep as Kenya. You have the Nkimas, the Mpologomas, you have the crocodiles in the south here, which are the crocodiles, you have the monkeys there, you have the horses here, and then our animalistic, we are called a totemic connectivity, begins to share with you and show you the interconnectedness of the African nation. But having said that, the history of the African, since we've lost sense of our entertainment, we no longer have fireplaces where grandmothers and grandfathers would take children weekly, daily on the recitations of these clan names. Some of that history might actually look like it's starting to disappear. But I could trace my history if I should pick up the Solomon and pick up the Queen of Sheba story and the gold trading of Solomon with the Great Zimbabwe, then I can actually go back as far deep into the Solomonic and the Davidic history itself. And then the last one, when you come to Shona people, we call our Friday Gadziriro, which means day of preparation, which is sabbatical. Yeah. And Sabbath itself, we call it Mugovera, the day of sharing. And then you'd wonder, how did a small little country in the deep south have actually the fullness of sabbatical observation within their own etymology as part of their calendar and naming? Then the word means God, the Alpha and Omega. Bara in Hebrew means the one who gave birth to. Ham is the father of the black people. So yes. Bara, Ham means God gave birth to Ham. And that is pure Shona. Bara, Hama. He gave birth to himself. He gave birth to his relative. So in etymology, in all syntax, if you can apply your mind, you begin to hear that the African epistemic thought patterns, the hegemony of their thoughts, has always been more central, to even to an extent that we can even make Hebrew children as our grandchildren. They cannot give birth to us because Abraham comes from our city in Ur of the Chaldees. We don't come out of him. He comes from us. So by maturity, we gave them Abraham, and by salvation, we gave them Jesus. Because he comes out of Egypt again. So superiority cannot be contested. History has no emotions. When you look into the mirror of history, you cannot fail to see the supremacy of the African nation. Genetics is only there to further prove it, that our genes are much, much older than those of those that have tried to capture us.
About Ham, and Ham being a product of a curse, Canaan came from Ham and being cursed, and the black race. That presupposes that all of the figures, Abraham and everybody who, of course, Noah, presupposes that we had certainly Noah white. And there's that. What's your thoughts on that? Because I dismissed the book of Enoch there. I just don't see Noah being white. Noah was black. He was black like his father, Lamech, black like everyone who was made in God's image from the dust. Made an image. Now, we had a GTR session 16, created black in the image of God. What are your thoughts about that in terms of the very early ancestors? And any thoughts about that? Especially we're talking about Ham, and it's told in religious circles that the curse of Ham led to the black race, and I don't see it how black can come from white. What are your thoughts on that?
When you read in the Bible the story of Ham, it's very fascinating because they say that Ham is the son of Noah who saw his father naked, and by doing that he was cast. And from the history. I read that you see from people from Kush, and Kush, which was now South Sudan, where we have a lot of history and a lot of records that are there, and the record shows that this civilization that was there was so much that when the other civilization came, that is Britain and whatever, this civilization was already there. If you look very keenly, and our Maponga, our reverend mentioned about the issue of Egypt. If you look at this issue of pyramids were such a wonderful architecture that even today the world marvels. But you see now the challenge is that they don't want to show the world that this came from Africa. And that is why when I was reading this, I said we need to trace and see the connection and how we can change the perception of people so that they can appreciate our origin. And because there's something that I read about Bill Gates, and this is what he said. He said that Africans are not part of the global economy. So that is why they are doing all they can so that they can eliminate us. They tried during Corona. Africans who withstood. They did not die. So that is why sometimes these things will come. But the truth is, white men are more superior. Even if you look at the issue of energy, they are more energetic. Look at all the sportsmen; they are all blacks. There is no one who can match a black person, either long distance. Even in Kenya, you see, we have conquered long distance. When it comes to short distance, these are people from black Americans. So that's why we are saying some of these things we just need to compile them, and we try to ask ourselves, where did we go wrong? Because they are trying to capitalize on this, and that is why we need to be very keen, and that is why this meeting is very important, so that we can see where we have gone wrong, so that we can come. And as we talk about decolonization, we cannot have decolonization unless we have the way forward. Where did we go wrong, and what can we do in order to make the way forward?
So Samuel, again, to your ancestry, who are the oldest persons that you can trace on your father's and mother's side, and where did they live? You mentioned the Congo. I recall you saying that. Can you go back how far back? Because Reverend Maponga, he's talking about King Solomon and Sheba, and going back on the Davidic line. This is like BC 1000, so well over 2,000 years ago. How far can you trace back in your family tree, from your ancestry?
From my father's side, because both my father and my mother are Kikuyus, the history tells us that the Kikuyu, who was the father of the Kikuyu, and the mother was Mombi. Kikuyu is said to have come from Ethiopia, and that's why some of these people from Kikuyu have some resemblance with people from Ethiopia. And then there are those that are said to have come from Congo, who are tall, dark guys. And if you look at the history from Kikuyu, we are told that this Kikuyu had 9 daughters. So the 9 daughters, the Kikuyu did not have any son. So he prayed to God so that God could bring 9 sons. So this is now where the history becomes a bit interesting. So, but there is one daughter, the 10th daughter, who did not get married. She's called Wamoyo. I've actually written a book. This is one of the book I've written about the 10th daughter who did not get married because she was very young when Kikuyu and Mombi prayed so that God could bring 9 sons. So the 9 sons are said to have come from Ethiopia. They got married to these 9 daughters, and that is where the generation came in. So that is the far I can go from our history. Yes.
Very, very good, very good. And that's on your father's side, both your parents. Then both your parents, you can go back. I would say, would that be 4 generations or 5 generations?
6 generations.
And countries other than Kenya, we're touching on Congo. And what are the countries besides Congo?
Yeah, from Congo we have Burundi. Then they went to Uganda. Uganda, you know, there's a lot of history of Buganda Kingdom and all these kingdoms. Then they went further to South Sudan, and from South Sudan is now where the Kikuyu prayed, and then he got 9 sons from Ethiopia, which is the neighboring country.
That's very interesting and fascinating. I'd like to do the DNA search. Reverend Maponga, this is offline at the moment, but I will look at the DNA profile for him and hopefully PLO Lumumba. For me, I know I'm a haplogroup E. And when I visited, the lesson or the ancestry of Congo is going to be referenced here. I visited Madagascar about roughly 3 years ago. So I visited Madagascar. And in Madagascar, I met tour guide Philippe Stefani. Now, his mother is Malagasy. She has some sort of Indian background, but she's Malagasy. But then his father, up to 5 or even 6 generations, would be Congolese. From the Congo. And when I looked at his DNA profile, it was E like me. And we are actually matching. It's remarkable. Out of 1.5 billion, we have so many people in Africa. We have well over 1.5 billion. I found one person. And it's not like I tested 10 people. I asked one person. I just felt that connection, one person. And it came out in the end that we share a direct paternal grandfather.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
And the test further showed that he had roots in the oldest part of France, the Normans. He also had some Scandinavian and Irish roots as well. And that's where the DNA also showed. So he did not remain in Africa. Again, it's a story, like I would say on paper and records, my strongest DNA connection, other than Philippe Stefani. Philippe Stefani is not a strong connection as the Da Costa MacDonald, who is a MacDonald, living in Trinidad, is 109 years old, born in 1917. He has a Scottish grandfather.
Oh, he's still alive?
It's Scottish. And if you read the works of Dr. Marie Charles, and she's based in the UK, she has records of prisoners being sent off from Europe into America and in the West. They were sent off. And so this would explain a lot of persons landed and arrived from Europe into Grenada. So his grandfather was one of those prisoners sent, and that would be after the mid-1800s, because he was born in 1840 in Scotland, and his name was John William. And he was born in Scotland, but then he was taken and arrived after 1850s, touching on 1860s, into Grenada. And then the son was William, and he was born in Grenada. And then Da Costa was born in Grenada. Although he lives in Trinidad, he was born in Grenada. So the history that I've seen of persons most sort of closely related to me, being of Scottish origin, people who are linked to Africa, but their DNA does not stay in Africa, like in the case of Philippe Stefani, and that old Norman French, because you could say that, oh, well, he has a name like Stefani, which again, the French influence in Madagascar, we all know the French has influenced many parts of Africa. A lot of Africans do speak French. Even I'm here now sitting in Burkina Faso, it's a dominant language. And we ask ourselves, how did people, speak those languages? How did they come up and speak, if it's French or English, or how do they speak in the Portuguese, like in the case of Angola? And we know we have the Dutch influence in South Africa, although the Dutch apparently did not come there in the 1600s or 1500s. They arrived more recently. What is your experience, Professor, in South Africa? Because it is a place that is strange. We know it's dominant in terms of whites. They own most of the land. It's told about 80% of the land. What's your connection and thoughts with South Africa and the history of South Africa? Because I have been exploring, and we look at de Klerk and people who were presidents and living there in South Africa. The president before Mandela took over, I could not find a lot of the ancestors who, some of them are McDonald's. I could not. What is your experience again with South Africa? Have you had much interaction, just to the profiles of people who are from there, who are white South Africans, and knowing a bit of their history? Because like you said, you studied history. History is your subject area. Have you done any research into South Africa?
I did a little bit of it, and it's very interesting that Dutch people came a bit earlier than the British, and if you look at 1652 to 1689, 92, in Britain, there is something that happened here. I would like to point out. It's called the Navigation Act. Navigation Act. This was a series of laws that were enacted in Britain, and the purpose was, one, to restrain and to prevent the domination of Dutch people in a trade, because that time Dutch people had already dominated the trade routes. So the reason why these British wanted to enact these laws is that they wanted to counteract the dominance of these Dutch people. So the first thing they said is that all the goods from the colonies must be carried by the British ships. That was the first thing. Then number two is that those goods were to be taken to Britain first. So that is also another thing. Then number three is that there was restriction of the use of materials by the colonies. For example, if it is Kenya, they were restricted from extracting their own minerals, and also number four, the use of those materials to make tools. And that is why they were restricted from making tools, no matter how simple they were. So those were very powerful four factors that made these British to restrict these Dutch people from dominating the sea routes. And this one is actually affecting even us today. If you look very keenly, you find that most of us Africans, we are restricted from, one, making tools. And you see, when we make tools, we become military powerful. That is one of the strategies. And that is why one of the things that maybe we are going to talk about maybe in the future is to see how we Africans, we can use the resources we have, because we have enormous wealth of resources, so that these resources can help us fast. Because if you look as things are, is that we Africans, we are not utilizing whatever you have. That is why the Burkina Faso president has done the opposite. Actually, even Gaddafi was killed because of that, because he used the natural resources he had to make the people that he was ruling to benefit from it. And that is why one of the things, one of the agenda of this meeting is to see how we can awaken the sleeping giant in our people, so that they can see the natural resources as something that is God-given, and it should be used for our own use. Now, there is maybe something I would like to ask our friend Joshua. Maybe he can shed some light on the issue of Dutch dominance in South Africa, because when we get this light, we can see the magnitude of the problem that we have in our African society, because the use of this idea of having all the resources taken by the whites is really a challenge. Maybe what will be your take, Maponga or Elder Maponga, on this issue, so that at least you shed some light on how this dominance of the Dutch people in South Africa, because this is actually the base, actually the whole of Africa. We cannot talk about Africa in the world if we don't talk about South Africa.
But Reverend, I must say, I am waiting for your response. What I want to do, because we're near wrapping up, we're a few minutes away from the hour, is that we have spoken about all these topics, and I really value Mr. Joshua Maponga. He's a beacon and light, to all millions of people. And I want this subject because I asked some Kenyan journalists in prior episodes to research about whites in Kenya. They live in Kenya. One's David, one is Samuel. They're researching. Even the editor of this whole program, Samuel, is based in Kenya. They could not find much history. They went back to South Africa, and yet they're Kenyans, and they were researching white Kenyan colonizers, and it went back to South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
I gave my story. I told you the story and the research that I'm doing. It is looking at Europe, looking at these characters. How do they fit in into a melanated Europe, and obviously the blacks had to go. When Joshua was not, he went offline a bit, I was talking again about the Costa, the story about my cousins and my roots. Even the gentleman I sampled in Madagascar, whose mom is Malagasy and father is 6th generation Congolese, and the DNA took me from Africa into Scandinavia, into Ireland, into the oldest part of France, Normandy. It took me there, and it's haplogroup E like me. And I suspect Reverend Joshua will be an E as well. We'll find out in about 2 or 3 months. But this is the challenges we have. We're presented with Africa in chains, and we have so many speeches, some eloquent, some not so eloquent. We know what to do, as all of us are Africans, and I'm proud to be a Yoruba Nigerian. We need to stop with this extraction model. We need to stop with it, because all it does is takes resources out of Africa for little or nothing, and we need to make things in Africa. We need to remove the borders that prevent capital, services, goods, the whole thing, the factors of production. We need to stop the barriers and take down the barriers. Why should I need a visa to go to Central African Republic? I required a visa, even though I'm a Nigerian passport holder. We need a 6th region with all their knowledge and skills to come to Africa to do business without the restrictions, without the barriers. We need to limit the terms of our presidents and leaders. We had no more than 2 terms. Nobody should be 5, 6, 10 terms in office. We need to change that. We need to come out with our gold, a resource-backed currency, and force FDI, the foreign direct investment. And in making more, our balance of trade will improve. Our economic situation will improve. We won't be looking at Burkina $2,000 a year per person. At Central African Republic, it's even worse. It's not even $500 a year. Some people make that in an hour in the West, and a place like Central African Republic, $500 a year. I can't even fathom that. I can't even process that. And so Africa will grow. Economists said that. The minute that Africa stops being a raw materials pit for the world, just extract, take, and we'll sell you back the finished goods when we're ready. And if you can't pay for it, we'll loan you the money. This constant extraction today, 58 million millionaires. Okay, some people don't report, but 58 million millionaires. There's not even 5% of that is black. We have billionaires, which are more public knowledge, because you can't be a billionaire not be noticeable. We don't even have 0.5%. We have these serious wealth gaps, and it falls along color lines. And people hold up their hands and like, oh, well, Africa is, no, forget, keep your aid. We don't need your aid. We just need to develop and keep our resources, tear up those nasty agreements post-Berlin Conference, throw the foreign interests out, keep the embassies. If you want an embassy, have it here. But you cannot keep owning Africa. Africa is for Africans. And I'd go far as say Africa is for black Africans. I'm sorry. In the case of South Africa, I could tell you, I don't know their stories. I tested a lot of Dutch people. They are black, like the people here. We have the reports and stories of, they call it the cabbage babies. And part of my series will look at it about how the origins of whites came about, because they want to tell us how our origins are. We have so much gaps in history. Machu Picchu, people left. The people in Orkney, Scotland, I went to the top of Scotland. They just picked up and left. People in Stonehenge left. All of a sudden, so many places in the world, people just picked up and left. They have gaps in the data. You mentioned about the 3x population growth even in Kenya. And we have a massive surge of brown, light-skinned people literally available around the world just in the last 200 years, which again points to something that dramatically increased the population. And then we talk about the stories of how the South Africans and the Australians and the New Zealand whites really came in little cages as cabbage babies. They have gestational cycles of 1 month. They were bussed and trained, put in train everywhere. They had orphanages to grow them up. Ellis Island in America had a lot of whites come there. One place accounts for 80% of the immigrants not running away from religious persecution, all coming to America, one place, given names. And they tell us that we blacks, we got our names. So I'm laying that foundation because this is work that I've done through DNA testing. The white McDonald's don't match. I'm listening to Fora every day. Not just forum, Fora, plural. The Logan family matches with me. And I did a series about the Logans. I call them the confused Logans. And the haplogroup E, which is me, the same haplogroup as Mandela, I'm pretty sure Reverend Joshua is an E. Einstein, to be the world's smartest man, was an E. Putin of Russia, Vladimir Putin is an E. President Wilson, the Wright brothers, all the Egyptian kings, again, Napoleon, Hitler, no, yes, Hitler, he was Hitler, Adolf Hitler was an E. If you survey 10 men, about 40% will be E's. They're the most populous of all. And what's counter to an E would be the R. Now, how they came about and they proliferated, how they want to say that even Africa is part R. You could find R DNA in Sub-Sahara, but the effort to connect, for example, Tutankhamun, the boy king. You heard of King Tut? He is described as an R. How could that be when all the other Egyptian kings around him were E's? And E is such a big haplogroup, and I need to stress it because this is going to lift the discussion about, because the phenotype you see here, you see Putin, he's a white guy. The phenotype is deceptive. You don't know. The genotype is where the conversation needs to go for us to lift, because the narrative is this on the street. Africa was beating drums and living in trees, Africans living in trees 100, 200, 300 years ago. According to the World Fairs, and they had some zoos in Belgium, in Europe, and they were showcasing backward Africans. Funny enough, those people were able-bodied and no defect, but they had freak shows of all sorts of whites having, I don't know, 5 legs, hair down to their toes down there. I mean, elephant man with the swollen lymph nodes, the different things. Now, again, I'm not attacking anyone, but they had freak shows for whites that showed a lot of people that were just off the chart, suggesting something was going on, like cloning, something was going on. And then they had these human zoos with fully able-bodied black children feeding them bananas because they were subhuman and stuff. And I posted about vestigial tails and things that people, and these are whites that then have these extra appendices and stuff. I mean, again, I'm just not making this stuff up. It's up there. You have to draw a quilt. And South African story is one that we need to address because it's like everything leads. I was doing reports in different African countries and I got back to South Africa. The biggest banks, Standard Bank, if you call it, is in South Africa. A lot of the wealth is concentrated there. The land, 80% is held by white South Africans, and it has to be dealt with. And even today, when I look at it, another discussion for another day, a topic for another day, how is Islam so prominent? The Reverend was talking about Sabbath keeping, about Hebrew influence even in Zimbabwe. And that Zimbabwe, yet the Ethiopian Jews or the Ethiopia has a claim to Judaism. But it is in a lot of parts of Africa, yet the growth of Islam, for me, you have to think about it, give the Blackies a religion that they kind of can cling to, which doesn't involve Judaism, because that is to be reserved for some other people who are not really Hebrews, are not really, and people need to figure this thing out. They need to figure this out, that our world has been hijacked. Our narratives have been tasted. And even if you have 20% of a lie, to the truth, it's still a lie. So, Reverend, I just wanted to just give that background before you weighed in on the South African.
Two narratives that we can zoom into quickly. The movement of humanity on the continent, as I said earlier on, has been happening. The Christopher Columbus was not the only explorer who left the shores of the Pacific. So there's one narrative that actually recites that some of the ships that would have had some shipwrecks way in time immemorial would have ended up in South Africa, and they were fully integrated into the South African and the Southern African, particularly the coastal lands, Zanzibar, Mozambique, Lorenzo Max, Cape of Good Hope, as they were traveling around, fueling water and etc. from the time that they were doing all these ship stories. But again, rightfully put, that the cabbage baby story then begins to give us another window of a whole new narrative, which then happened at the boosting out of seemingly the small population of the Caucasian and how it was populated. And I think that is quite a very, very interesting subject that will need to be studied much more deeply to put for ourselves our own genetic maps, our own genetic mapping which will then be able to classify for us and follow for us the mitochondrion, which is the black Eve mother gene of blackness, which runs in all humanity as it were. And to the establishment of where was that and how was that tempered with. Truly, when you see some of the pictures that I've looked at in the book that you showed me, the cabbage baby narrative, the movement of the Caucasian population into Africa, the absence of continuous history, and the deliberate inclusion of that history into formal education, then perpetuates the lie. Technically, you are able to write a story that Van Riebeck comes from Dutchland. But if people came from Dutchland, how many of them came? And how many of them are here? How many of them are here now? And how did they multiply from 2 ships to 5, 6, 7, 10 million that we are now having in the country? Surely, and white people don't have as many children. They have 1 kid, 2 kids each. But you're looking at a whole line. And from an Afrocentric perspective, humanity, humankind, Europeans and white people are not human. I'm sorry to say that. I'll qualify why I say that. Because to be human is to be humankind. It is to be mankind. We measure humanity not on your skin, but on the level of the DNA-ness that you have towards other humans. That's what makes you human. And constantly the absence of empathy, the absence of Ubuntu in the hearts of the Caucasian, be it murder, be it destruction of nature, their skin has no memory of humanity. Even the sun cannot talk to them. They feel nothing over the death of a human being, the death of trees, the vandalism and pollution of rivers. It means nothing to them because they are intrinsically, genetically not attached, connected to that which is life itself. And apartheid could not be a better illustration of the inhuman experience. How do you get HIV viruses and you inject them into Africans just to kill as many as you can? So that what? So that you can be in power. How do you take blacks and put them in plantations and do what you are doing? For what? For what? There's enough land for everybody. I mean, my famous speech, how do you wake up in the morning to go and create nuclear weapons to destroy the whole world? And what do you get out of that? Is that humanity? Is that technology? And I like what you said, that our technology must not be to destruction. Our technology must be to development, making human lives better. Transportation, disease management, tourism, preservation of nature, clean energy, reproduction, good things that make life better. No, rather you want weapons, you want guns, you want nuclears, you want nukes, you want uranium, you want to, even this mining thing for me, I take it with a pinch of salt. How do you destroy a whole 200, 300, 500 hectares of land just to pick up some few stones you call diamonds and put them in another warehouse somewhere else? What do you do with all this? What do you do with all this land that you've destroyed? Why not just qualify or quantify the resource and then make a financial instrument and continue your life? But no, when you don't have humanity, hence I'm glad when you say that the conversation needs to move away from skin. The conversation needs to get to the DNA conversation because that's where humanity sits. That's where mankindness sits. And for the African, we cannot use the European standards of development because they will end up making us like them. Because then we become insensitive to each other, to our environment. And then when we lose humanity, what do we become? Then this whole Irungu cabbage baby, cabbage mentality, cabbage education, cabbage religion, cabbage technology, cabbage sports, cabbage governance systems. Where how do you destroy the borders when the borders are actually founded on the cabbage migration rules? You stop here, you can't go there, you can't. Who benefits from that? It is the same colonial system that benefits from that. Now, the South African issue for me, I'll be very interested to see how much work we can do so that we don't just say things for the sake of saying them. And sooner or later, some of these conversations, we need to make themselves into genuine scripts, which can begin to punctuate our academic corridors with quotable, teachable, researchable truth and information that can now give us that background. And the Roman Dutch fundamentally become the citadel of the devil himself. Because the Roman Dutch law becomes the anchor which holds this entire conversation together. But legally, you cannot. What is a human being? You define them according to the law. Who must own the land? You define them according to the law. Then this is where the Roman Dutch are sitting. And the citadel of the Roman Dutch in South Africa is the Netherlands themselves. And those are the Netherlands. So let's look at the population of the world through the perspective of genetics. What will it look like if it was a natural birth? What would it look like if we go for the cabbage baby mindset? What would it look like if it is a crossbreeding and cross, so that we can be able to present an academic front that presents the authenticity of the information, and truth can stand by itself. It does not need anyone to protect it. But yes, the South African population of the white people surely is very questionable, and I can raise my suspicion that the cabbage baby narrative could actually have a very interesting manifestation within the South African political terrain.
I just, feel that there is, yes, a place for all of us on the planet. I mean, I travel over the world, travel to so many places, and as you know, you go over, you see so much vast land that's not occupied, land that's available, but there has to be a fair and equal treatment. And I would say that the remarks about Europe and being European, I would say European visitors. How about that? European visitors. I would not even say colonizers, because those colonizers, based on history like this, history of these paintings would be black people, melanated people who were the colonizers. We did this to ourselves. We changed the world. And for what reason? The growth of Freemasons and Freemasonism, that captivated the whole world. And then it's a matter of changing this narrative and script. And that's where we see Freemasonry and it came about. So I could just say that we have a lot of homework to do. We have to dissect and keep to the labels. We cannot just give it away and saying that we're using even European standards, because this was Europe, not thousands, but literally 250 years, literally 300 years ago, but it goes back to about 250 years ago. The changes took place. America is celebrating 250 years. They're celebrating 250 years. We know the president is doing things that they say is crazy. He's going into the Smithsonian. He's taking things apart. But I'm like, is that really right? Or is he on a mission of some sorts? Because some things that we are holding to, because of the narrative that we are given, in this conversation that came up, how did Europe even become white? We know the population grew from 700 million to 8 billion in not even 300 years. There had to be a program in place to put near 7 billion people on the planet in such a short time. How can you create that in such a short time, not even 300 years? So there was a repopulation agenda from the year 1900. We were at the end of Victoria's life. She died in 1901. And even then, the history books paint her as white, but she was a mixed race person. She was black, but even the phenotype was not looking all white. But the end of Victoria's life was 1901. And from 1901 to today, that's 125 years. We created near 6 billion from 1.7 billion. We created over 6 billion people. Think about it. We're now at 8.2 billion. What happened when the Iron Curtain fell and it was just nothing going on? My wife was Polish, has stories. They couldn't travel. Those people who left Poland were considered criminals, and a lot of them went to the States. But there was a curtain, a lack of information going on where they populated Europe. Where did the blacks go? My ancestors, Da Costa MacDonald, others were taken as prisoners from Europe. He has the records from Europe into the Caribbean. As you know, the Caribbean and the West is speaking how many African languages? Again, I am not doubting about the whole transatlantic slave story and theory and how that came about. Look, how many African languages do we speak? Now, how many European languages do we speak in Africa today? Look how much French is spoken. The Frankish Empire was powerful. Haiti was the pearl of the Caribbean. And French is in Canada, Quebec. French is even in USA, Louisiana, a whole state that is French, dominated. In the Caribbean, French is. In Africa, French is. You couldn't have a few little white missionaries with big sticks or Bibles to make sure we would speak their language. That doesn't make sense. We have to use our brains and think that the way the history is told, it's his story, the ruler, his story, rather than our story. And that's what you say history is, because it doesn't make sense. All these poles, they do not add up. And I would love for this continuing conversations to take place and for us to examine the South African model, How is it that they came to be? Because they have this right, just like the Jews have a right to religion. They have scrubbed, from my humble opinion, they have scrubbed Africa of Judaism and replaced it with Islam. We know a lot of women today I see around Africa are covered. Now, I respect my Islam brothers, but why are you going to dictate and scour? And Reverend Maponga did mention it's not just the Ethiopians. If you go in every African country, I guarantee you'll find some element of Judaism.
My brother, not even element. Not even elements. When you come to nations such as the Venda, who are the Lembas, there's a whole study that was done, which actually proves that the Vendas of South Africa, where my grandmother comes from, they have more Jewish blood than the Jews themselves. And they still keep the Sabbath. They believe also they have the Ark. You get into Nigeria, they still do their Shavuot, their Shabbat, their Yom Kippur. They do their trumpets. They do their Passovers in the very tradition of the Hebrew itself. And I even think that some of the Black American history, in the midst of trying to trace their steps back, and now they're claiming that they are Hebrews. I think they're scratching this thing from the window. You know, we don't teach Hebrew. We live Hebrew. We practice life. Not necessarily that we must now go to the Torah and read section 5, section 10. We live this. So Africa is full. You get the way we name our children, the way we name our environment, the way we do our ceremonies. Most of the ceremonies that you find in Africa, be it the sacrificial system, be it the anointing systems, be it the birth, you would find, if you are an ardent scholar of culture, you will not fail to see a common blue thread that connects African culture to the very essence of what we call Hebrew faith today. From those ceremonies of putting a chicken on your head and etc. to remove bad luck. I mean, you see the Jews do it. I mean, that's purely African. They need a law. They need a law of women and their menstrual cycles. They are observed to the T. As the Torah has it. Now, only a fool who was with a whitewashed brain would fail to see evidence in the face of culture that has not changed. And I'm glad to say that our African culture is the mother. And even if we can argue until the cows come home, there is no way a subservient culture, a subservient gene can come onto the continent and claim dominance unless it is one of us.
The conversation is going very well. And I would just make one request that the materials that our Professor McDonald has, you package them so that at least we can have them in one data, because I already have the one for Professor Maponga. I already have the one for Professor Lumumba and the one I did, so that the 4 documents, we can synchronize them so that they can come as a big word. The part that you did was pre-colonial, it was before colonial. Then we have done colonial, and then after, because we are looking at decolonization, which is trying now to come out of the mess that was done by the colonial masters. And I think that one can do a good service so that we can start. And as Professor Joshua said, this is something that we already have it. So it's just a matter of packaging it, and we start training even next week. We already have the materials. The only materials that we don't have is the one for Dr. McDonald. You just bring. I'll be able to synchronize it well in a sequence way. Yeah, so that after we do it, we go through it, because the one for Pierre Lumumba, the one I did, we have already done. Our Professor Joshua Maponga has already gone through it. I have already gone through the one he did about the bridge. Is already done. So the one that is remaining is the one for McDonald. Please package it, give it to us. Then we shall see how we can sort it, and then we come up with a comprehensive curriculum that is pre-colonial, colonial, and after colonial. That will be decolonization, and I think the materials will be complete.
Pre-colonial period, which I would count anything before the 1770s, because 1776 was a big year. That's Independence of America. They're celebrating 250. But if you're talking about 1776, which I take to be 776, but 1776, 250 years ago, look at color and look at origins of those whites who are called colonizers, which in my mind were black people, but call it colonizers. Look at the color and look at the rise of Islam in especially the African territories during that period, because I know, and Joshua Maponga confirms even about the historical and the entrenched, embedded ways and cultures and rituals and rites of Jewish and Judaism in Africa, not just one, but many African countries. This will lead to a higher level of truth and the awakening when we see the history that's been taken from it, whitewashed, and the imposition of certain religions, and especially, again, not decrying anybody, but with the rise of Islam. If we're truly more Hebrews and Jews, again, traced to the Bible and have been scattered and mislabeled and confused, then we owe it to the next generation to open their minds, to open their hearts. When they see a white person, they would say, oh, you're a European visitor, you're not a European. When they see someone who embraces Islam, okay, we respect your views. Again, in this channel, in this forum, we're respecting views. But you have a religion, like you can say Mormonism, I don't mean Mormonism even shorter period, Mormonism, Islam, you have a shorter time frame that doesn't really go back to Bible days, as far as I can tell and see it. So when you look at the roots, we're looking at this program, Genesis Timeline Roots. It is GTR. That is roots. We have to go back to the original Black people, tell our story, tell of our tribal, our customs and traditions, but also the religions. And if the root is short, just like in a tree, the tree will fall down. Any tree that has short roots will not last. It will blow over. So we need to go to the deep roots. And if we go to that Judaism, and the roots of Judaism as it pertains to Black people, to melanated people, to Africans, to Caribbean, we will see the world in that different light. We'll have and unlock these mysteries. Because I always ask myself, why, that movie Roots that I don't like, I hate that series Roots. Alex Haley was a thief and a criminal and a plagiarist and a liar and whatever. And he told a story about Kunta Kinte and all that. Some people found it fascinating, but that was not based on anything. He was a plagiarist. He was a liar, a thief. He wouldn't work for government, whatever he was doing. He was a Coast Guard man or in intelligence industry, whatever he was. And people follow after him. Like, you have a fellow PBS, which I think the show is going to be canceled soon, Finding Your Roots. I don't know why they use the root words. With Henry Gates and his posse. He's a haplogroup R. So he's a Black man, phenotype Black, but genotype cabbage baby white. And so I don't have to listen to him. I don't have to listen to his stories about finding your roots, because we need to explore our roots. And our roots are custom, native, planetary, basic, goes back in time. And let our children know these answers. Let them know our stories. Joshua has so much stories to share. And with you combine the DNA in proper independent labs without the garbage and the confusion, the fraud. When you look at the real path, you will see where you connect in the world, and you will see how far you go back in your timeline. And that, to me, is powerful. That will unlock things we would not even imagine. We need to do that together. We owe it to the next generation not to confuse them. So I call them European visitors. If you're white, Europeans are Black people. Colonizers are and were Black people. And we need to redefine these terms and phraseology and make it just right, because it leads to confusion. So that's where I leave it as that. I thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you, Reverend Maponga. Thank you, Professor Samuel. This has been Rich series and episode 22, GTR, closing out. Thank you. Good night. Thank you so much for contributions.
Thank you. Be blessed.
So much. Be blessed. Thank you.